Deirdre, you wrote an article called Happyism, which is a bit of a great read. Its subtitle is The Creepy New Economics of Pleasure. What motivated you to write that article?
Well, I was asked by the editor of the New Republic, which is a big magazine of opinion in the United States, to do the article. And so he sent me a bunch of books on measuring happiness. Now, I'm an economist. I believe in measurement. I'm an accountant for the nation is what an economist is. But these psychologists and economists have gotten together to try to measure happiness 1, 2, 3. So they come up to people on the street and with a microphone and they say, on a scale of 1 to 3, how happy are you? And then they add it up, for Australia and talk about how happy Australia is. And it's crazy. It's loony. So that's basically what the article said, is it's loony.
It does pretty much say that, although it does lead into one of your other interests in life, and that is, what is it that has made us much richer? Is it in fact just markets?
Yeah.
Because people say being richer makes you happy, and you have a bit of a go at that in the article too.
Yeah.
Happy 1, 2, 3. But if it isn't markets that have made us richer, what do you think it is?
It's sociology. It's a change in ideology. Once, and more or less everywhere, the government and the elite and the powers that be, the aristocracy, the priests, were very hostile to innovation in particular. The word innovation didn't, in English, become a good word until late in the 1800s. Before that, it was heresy. It was dangerous. Oh, we don't want to innovate. And so whole societies were organized to stop innovation. Well, that's not a very good way to get rich. If you kill off every new idea as fast as you can, you're not going to do very well. So what changed in northwestern Europe, starting in Holland in the 1600s, and then spreading to England and other places, was a bourgeois deal. You let me, as a bourgeois business person, engage in creative destruction, and I'll make you all rich. So it's nice.
So what was it that set the idea of innovation free?
Well, it was an accident of the politics in Europe, politics and sociology, I'd have to say, that you start in China and Japan and Europe and everywhere, and the Ottoman Empire, with this very hierarchical idea of what people should be like. They should stay in the place they were born in. And that started to break down. You can see it in the Reformation after 1517, Martin Luther and all that. And then again in the Dutch Revolt from Spain, which started in 1568 and went on for 80 years. And then in the English Civil War in the 1600s. And all those which didn't have parallels in these other great societies like China and Japan and the Ottoman Empire, made people bold. Even women were allowed to preach in Anabaptist and Quaker congregations. So equality was the basic engine that made people prepared to have a go.
But why is it now that so few people recognise this? Why do you think it is that everyone says, as markets spread, democracy will spread, wealth will spread, happiness will spread?
Yeah, well, not
and
so sure
people
about
haven't gone back and said, well, why did markets start to spread?
Well, they didn't spread. There have always been markets. Since the caves, there have been markets.
Well, that's true.
It's somewhat surprising, but you find amber from the Black Sea in Egyptian grave goods, 2,000 years before the modern era. So it's not so much that markets spread, it's that the market test was honored for the first time in a serious way. That is, people were prepared to pay, and that was the test. What were they willing to pay? Instead of the test being, did the elite want it? Or did the king think it was a fine idea, or the church? So that idea that economic decisions ought to be made by the economy instead of by someone else, some other part of the society, was what spread in the 1600s and the 1700s, and it resulted in this astonishing burst of innovation that we can see all around us. Fluorescent lights and electronic this, that, and the other thing. And we're rich because of innovation, not because of investment or exploitation or the government or trade unions. That's not what made us rich. What made us rich is human creativity on a massive scale.
And one aspect of seeing that creativity in action, coming alive and doing something, is innovation.
Well, sure. It's easy to innovate. I mean, hey, I could start speaking Dutch, but that wouldn't make for a very good interview on the ABC.
No, it certainly wouldn't.
Yeah, and actually, since my Dutch is very bad, it would be even worse. And that would be an innovation. You can innovate by snapping your fingers every time you go through a traffic intersection to keep away the elephants. But innovation that ordinary people are willing to pay for, that's really the economist's definition of income. And if we can keep innovating that way instead of snapping our fingers or speaking Dutch in inappropriate circumstances or doing what the church or the boss or the elite says, then we'll have higher and higher income. We'll be truly innovative.
Oh, one of our scientists believes that a good description of innovation is the new application of existing knowledge.
Yeah.
But you'd add to that and say it has to be an application that's beneficial, that people want to put into practice.
Exactly, that they not just want to put into practice, but they're willing to pay. They're willing to put their money where their mouth is. But I would argue with this guy, I suppose it's a guy,
Yeah, it is.
by saying, no, there's also extraordinary new discoveries, I suppose he would agree with that are completely unanticipated and aren't applications.
Of existing knowledge.
That's right. Who knew when Orville Wright, who supposedly invented the airplane, although lots of other people claim that they did it. But anyway, when Orville Wright was asked by a journalist what use the airplane would have, he said, well, sport mainly.
People don't always have insight, do they?
No, well, they don't, because it's so hard to anticipate what people will be willing to pay for, where the technology is going to go. What makes it innovative is not the routine application of existing knowledge. And I guess to be more sharp about it, I would disagree with this guy entirely. What makes it innovative is, well, it's new. And if it's just the application of existing knowledge, there's nothing essentially creative about it. So
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, well, it's not that it's useless to apply existing knowledge. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the macro inventions, as a friend of mine, Joel Mokyr, calls them, the macro inventions are often these startling divergences from what we thought was going to happen. The computer, the personal computer, or texting, which was once the phone lineman's code and is now the life of teenagers.
Indeed.
You know, completely unanticipated. So there's this deep human creativity which was unleashed by the accident, so to speak, of the growth of equality in northwestern Europe.
Well, can we turn back to happiness?
Oh, let's do it.
People seem to equate that with money all the time.
Yeah, they
You've got
do.
some interesting views about that expressed in this article.
Yeah.
Namely, that perhaps if people sought to put into practice some of the classically identified virtues of life, they might be a bit happier. Is that a correct reading of your view?
Well, it certainly is. I wrote an entire book called The Bourgeois Virtues, Ethics for an Age of Commerce. And the argument there is that a full human life is about the virtuous life. Now, this is a cliche, an ancient cliche among philosophers and theologians and so forth, but it's certainly true. Happiness is not about the amount of stuff you have. But on the other hand, I also emphasize that it really is a wonderful thing now that so many people in the world, and more every year, have an adequate amount of stuff. Because look, when you're trying to get along on $1 a day in Calcutta, or $3 a day in the mountains of Peru, all you think about is getting another dollar. And that's a sad life to have. Whereas in a country like Australia that's rich, we're able to turn to other things, turn to wonderful interview programs on the ABC, for example, just as a case in point.
Do you have much experience that enables you to proffer a guess as to whether young people today, let's just say young men's under 30, believe that prudence, temperance, courage, justice, faith and hope are things that will deliver them great happiness?
You've forgotten love.
And love, sorry.
Of all.
Love, sorry.
Yeah, no, I don't think because they're constantly told that success in life is the person who ends with the most toys wins. But I think what people, not all people, but what many people discover as they get older, is that that's not so, that their income or the amount of stuff they have is not the same thing as having friends, having faith, having an interesting job, having marvelous colleagues, reading interesting things, having interesting experiences is much more important than the number of cars you have.
You pose an interesting mental experiment in the article, an experiment you identify as first having been proposed by a philosopher called Robert Nozick.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but smile when I was reading this and imagine how many young people would, in the first instance, say, yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
And then when you put the next question, so perhaps you can explain that experiment to me again.
It's that, imagine that there was an amazing machine that you could be hitched up to, and you could have any life you wanted, be the opening batsman for Australia and score a century or two in the Ashes, and then you could be a famous actor and to have great success, and you would feel that you were having that life. You'd have the experience of that life, anything you wanted. But, and here's the problem, it would actually only take half an hour for this whole life experience to take place, and then you'd die. And who would accept that?
Nobody I know.
Well, that's the trouble. If you were, had fourth stage cancer or something and were about to die, I'd do it, I guess. Why not? But if you're yourself and you're going to live for a few years, then you wouldn't do it. And that's very interesting because it suggests that experience, being filled up with, the glory of being the opening batsman for Australia, is not really what the satisfactions of life, happiness, are about. So it's a critique of the idea that filling people up with ice cream or opening batsmanhood or whatever you want to call it is what makes for a successful life as against some imagined person. Now, of course, in movies and songs and novels and so on, we imagine another life. But then we put down the book and we go back to our real life. And if we can't do that, if we die half an hour after having had this wonderful experience, then it shows that we're more than just experience machines. We're not cats. We're humans.
Well, in fact, the point of that experiment that came to me anyway, from my perspective, was that the great happiness is in being yourself.
Absolutely.
And it's okay for you to go and have other wonderful experiences.
Sure.
But not to give up the ultimate experience, and that is being yourself.
And it's strange because even if yourself is a very hard life person, even if you don't like your life much, as you said, you want to have it. You want it to be yours. Now, and this isn't just some romantic fancy. It's how we actually behave. But I emphasize, I say it again, that in order to have the scope of a full human life, so you're not miserable all the time, so that you're not struggling to feed your children and so on, it's wonderful that in the last 2 centuries we've gotten so rich. And it's not that the goods are the point. It's that having the goods frees us to have fuller human lives.
And that apparently shows up in surveys people do.
Yeah.
These are the economists measuring things again. Attendance at concerts and performances and that sort of thing, that when people have more money, they do go out and seek a fuller life. But do they go out and seek a better life?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, after all, they read trashy novels and they
watch trashy television.
Not, of course, anything on the ABC. That's all high quality. You know, humans have a great capacity for ruining their lives, too, and wasting them. But on the other hand, a higher and higher percentage of the population is having a fuller life. My ancestors were Irish and Norwegian peasants, and, you know, if you go back far enough, they're having a terrible life. And now here I am writing books and speaking to a person on the other side of Australia and so forth.
Indeed. Now, I have a bone to pick with you.
Oh, let's hear it.
Look, it's not a serious one, but you know, when you're talking about happiness might be the final hours of a cricket match for the Ashes at Lord's on a perfect London day in July. Well, you know, we've got some test matches here, and the one in Adelaide's pretty good. I think you'll enjoy it.
I'm sure I'll enjoy it. I'm going to relish it. I have my binoculars. I have a hat. I'm all set to go.
Terrific. Now, can we just recap on the thought process that we're going through here, that you've taken me through? And that is, markets have got a role, but they've been around forever. What really made a difference was setting people free, giving each person the dignity of being themselves.
That's right.
The capacity to think freely, or the freedom to think freely. They always had the capacity. Not to worry so much about what the lords of the manor thought.
Absolutely.
And to come up with their own ideas, put them into practice, and if the market would buy them, make a bit of money.
That's right. And there are hundreds and hundreds of examples of this. Arkwright was a barber, and he invented a spinning machine. You know, that was in the 1700s. People weren't allowed to do it 3 centuries earlier in England. And this happens over and over again. Edison was a telegraph operator, and yet he could have a go. Now, the danger is that fair goes will hurt the have-a-go mentality.
I don't quite understand that, sorry.
Well, I mean that the equality of people is the engine that makes for innovation. This new equality, this unique freedom and dignity for ordinary people. And along with that, of course, comes democracy. But the sort of chronic danger of democracy is that the people will rise up, not rise up exactly, but just vote up and hurt innovation by insisting on redistribution now. And the problem is that redistribution now, hang the bankers from the lamppost and take away their money and hand it out to the poor, doesn't really improve the lot of the poor very much compared to innovation. This bourgeois deal that I talked about. Let innovation happen. This doesn't mean complete laissez-faire. I think there ought to be a social safety net. But it means that market-tested innovation is the way forward. And in the third act of the drama, the poorest people are made much better off, which is what's happened in the last couple of centuries.
Well, you've done 2 books in this series. How many more to come?
Well, I'm working on the 3rd volume. I'm almost finished with it. And I'm hoping, I think I'll get a boxed set. How cool is that? Like Harry Potter. I'll have a box set of 3 volumes.
Honestly, Deirdre McCloskey, I don't know how many books you've written. I know you've written towards 1,000 or more articles, widely respected all over the world, having written articles on economics and one on what you call crossing, having come from being Donald McCloskey to Deirdre McCloskey.
That was a book indeed.
You know, I doubt that you need to compare yourself to Harry Potter books, really. I think you're offering... Let me not demean them. They've offered great hope to lots of kids, and they've got lots of kids to read who might not have read.
They do.
But you've raised lots of fascinating ideas and got lots of people thinking about what it means to have a free life and a better life and the value of that. And I thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
Deirdre McCloskey is a professor of economics, history, English and communication at the University of Illinois in Chicago, and she's in Australia as the distinguished guest of the Economic Society of Australia and to deliver the Centre for Independent Studies John Bonython Lecture, which you'll be able to hear on RN's Big Ideas later this week. You're on RN, you're listening to Counterpoint with me, Amanda Vanstone, and we've just been talking about markets and riches. But think about it, if those markets are corrupt, you and I end up paying more for what we want. And that surely can't be a good thing.